lot of work in the City of London in particular over the last 15 years and taken a great interest in the transport strategies and transport proposals that have been coming through from the city. It's changed significantly over that period of time, and we can all see now there's a much greater priority for active travel and public transport, and we're all beginning to see and enjoy the benefits of those changes coming through as part of the city. This project is a really important project. It's got lots of different transport elements to it that have been worked on over a number of years now. I think you and I were recalling, Peter, probably back from 2014 when it was first being developed as a project. A few of the prompts that came through for that were the accidents involving cyclists at the junction. Very difficult for cyclists to navigate this five-arm junction, and they were having difficulties there. And then there's the lack of capacity for pedestrians. The studies that the city did showed that at least 40% of people were crossing the roads when it was showing as a red man. So that was the first bit of learning. The piece of analysis that then really got my attention is that if those people hadn't been crossing on a red man and had waited for a green man, it would have then stopped people getting out of the station. The build-up of pedestrian density would have been such that people would have been restricted from coming out onto the pavements, and that really underlines what a challenge it was and how important it was to reclaim more space for pedestrians there and change the priority of the traffic movements and vehicle movements through the junction. That was done through a lot of detailed modelling work and assessment work, and we've seen now the first parts of that where we've mainly got buses and cyclists coming through here, and through traffic doesn't use the junction and nor deliveries. But there's another phase to it which will redirect some of the buses out of this particular junction over the next few years as well. The city started to reallocate space using quite simple wands really in the highway to give some additional space over to cyclists, and then some fairly basic curb material to widen out some of the pavements. I think that has been a really helpful example of how we can make progress with some of these ideas sooner. We do seem to tie ourselves down in really long periods of sort of consultation and development, and I think there's a lot to be said for just demonstrating how we can use the space differently, using that with some fairly basic affordable materials, and then once we've decided on what those alignments should be and the space allocation, then doing as they're doing here now at Bank, turning that into its permanent form. But really, it feels as though the challenge is quite urgent, and we need to find more straightforward ways of achieving that. You don't have to look far on social media to see that LTNs are seen as Marmite really for some people. Some people are really strongly against the use of them. They feel that they have negative impacts on parallel routes and that they don't have enough of a holistic view. Equally, there's a stronger views about the importance of there being safe streets to schools, routes and areas where children can walk and cycle safely and not be fearful of the impacts of through traffic and speeding traffic. So it seems to me we're headed in a good direction. We've got more 20-mile-an-hour zones, and we all know that if traffic is travelling at 20 miles an hour or slower, the degree of impact or severity it's likely to have on pedestrian or cyclists is much reduced. I think it's also a really important part of the education of drivers that those are the appropriate speeds to be moving around the city at. That it's not, this road system isn't here for people to be charging around at dangerous speeds on. If I look back at some of the earlier work I did for some of the local authorities, there were always requests about reducing through traffic through people's local neighbourhoods, looking at ways to keep that traffic on more appropriate routes. But there wasn't as much being done about reallocating street space. We saw very few schemes coming through which were reallocating space to cyclists and to pedestrians. It was almost a rearrangement of that space so that local environmental areas would have lower flows coming through them, but it didn't go to the next stage. There was also not as much awareness maybe, or as much proactive policy making with regards to air quality either, and I think we've seen a radical change over that period of time in the emissions that are coming out of the back of buses and public transport vehicles. I remember as a cyclist at that time, you really did have soot on your face and up your nostrils, and that's hugely changed now. The larger particulates have been massively reduced, and we are all aware that we've now got to go through the process of reducing the smaller particulates, which are also causing lots of harm. The air quality piece has been moving forward really well. It literally is only this third stage of the extension where Sadiq is experiencing some pushback on it. The first two stages of it went through with very little objection, and people have seen quite clearly the benefit of the clean air. It's quite hard to argue, isn't it, against having clean air. And we sort of hope that goes through towards the end of this year as the rollout of the third piece of it. Projects we've been working on the Museum of London for the last 5 to 6 years, and now it's about how that's going to integrate itself with the local highway. We've been working on some of the tower projects along Bishopsgate and Gracechurch Street, and very much part of ensuring the delivery and servicing of those is undertaken overnight, and that it's consolidated, and that there's the opportunity to use electric vehicles for that for the future. So that's a radical change. And we've also been working on the integration of some of the public realm with these projects and the improvement of the pedestrian environment. At one of the locations, we've looked at very similar analysis as was used at Bank Junction about what's the capacity of the pavement to hold that number of people if everyone's going to wait for the green man to come through. And I think that's informing us increasingly that more time needs to be allocated to pedestrian priority and for pedestrian crossings. And there's a lot that we can learn from I think some of the lunchtime street closures that were being done before the pandemic. I really enjoyed the one at Chancery Lane. Maybe excellent weather contributed to it as well as some music and some good street food trucks. But that went really well and demonstrated how we could be using those spaces differently for different periods. I think it's accepted that for many of these routes we probably do need to retain some servicing and some access, and they've got to be able to, continue to trade. But there's no question that people enjoy them being traffic free, and with, as I say, food trucks and space. I think on Chancery Lane they put down a bit of AstroTurf and a five-a-side goal, and that had a number of people taking part in that, and there were some musicians as well. Really nice. And I think there's much of that we could bring into this central area weekends. It fits really well with the objectives of Destination City, and now that's being kind of fed through into the Culture Mile bid. So there were some quite distinct areas around here, around Bank Junction, that we could look at maybe linking up through to St Paul's, where we could have those as a pedestrianised area for the weekends. There's the Culture Mile itself, which is going to be developed between Barbican and the new Museum of London in the West End of Smithfield. That's an amazing opportunity as well, and perhaps that one's going to be more permanent as a pedestrian space as we gradually evolve there. But the demonstration of how we can have pedestrian-only space in the central area for weekends, I think, is exactly the thing we should be moving forward with.
They're all going in the right direction then?
We're all going in the right direction.